You wake up to your phone buzzing with notifications. Another video has dropped in the Kyren Lacy case, and this time it's from Louisiana State Police themselves, released months after the former LSU wide receiver took his own life. The footage hit the internet like a bombshell. State police aren't backing down from their original conclusion. In a detailed statement accompanying the video release, they doubled down hard. All evidence collected supports the conclusion that Lacy's reckless operation of the green Charger in oncoming traffic triggered the chain of events that led to a fatal crash. The words are clinical, official, final, but they land in a landscape already torn apart by grief, anger, and mounting questions about what really happened that December night in 2024. The video itself shows grainy dashcam and surveillance footage from multiple angles, cars weaving through traffic, brake lights flashing, the chaotic seconds before impact. State police walked through their reconstruction frame by frame, pointing to what they say is Lacy's vehicle moving erratically in the moments before the collision that killed an innocent person. Their timing couldn't be more controversial. This release comes after Lacy's attorney had already gone public with claims that completely contradict the police narrative, stating that Lacy's car was far behind the accident at the time of impact. The comment sections across social media erupted immediately, some people pointing to the video as vindication of the charges, others calling it a posthumous character assassination of a young man who can no longer defend himself. Former teammates sharing memories of Lacy, insisting he would never drive recklessly. Strangers who never met him convinced of his guilt based on a charging document they've never read. And here's where it gets even more complicated. Lacy died 2 days before he was supposed to face a grand jury. 2 days before he could present his side, his evidence, his truth. Now state police are releasing their version of events to a public that's already made up their minds one way or another. The victim's family deserves justice and answers. Lacy's family says their son deserves to have his name cleared. Both things might be true. Both things might be impossible now. What would you do if you were on that grand jury watching this video, knowing the defendant had already taken his own life under the weight of these accusations? The crash happened on a cold December evening in Louisiana, the kind of night when roads get slick and visibility drops as temperatures fall. Multiple vehicles were involved in a chain reaction collision that left one person dead and several others injured. Emergency responders arrived to a scene of twisted metal and shattered glass spread across multiple lanes of traffic. Kyren Lacy was identified as one of the drivers involved. According to the initial police report, witnesses described seeing a green Dodge Charger driving erratically in the moments before the crash. That Charger was registered to Lacy. Within days, investigators had pieced together what they believed was a clear narrative. Lacy had been driving recklessly, swerving into oncoming traffic, and his actions had triggered the deadly sequence of events. The charges came down hard and fast: negligent homicide, felony hit and run, the kind of charges that carry serious prison time, that end careers, that rewrite futures. For a 24-year-old who had just finished his college football career and was looking at potential opportunities to play professionally, it was devastating. His attorney released a statement saying Lacy was cooperating fully with the investigation and maintained his innocence. But here's what made the case unusual from the start. There were conflicting witness accounts. Some people at the scene reported seeing the green Charger behaving erratically. Others said the crash happened so fast it was impossible to tell which vehicle caused the initial impact. Surveillance footage from nearby businesses captured some angles but not the critical moment of collision. The physical evidence, tire marks, and debris patterns could be interpreted multiple ways depending on which expert you asked. LSU stood by their former player initially, releasing a careful statement expressing concern for everyone involved while noting that Lacy had graduated and was no longer with the program. His teammates were more vocal. Several posted on social media defending his character, saying the Kyren they knew would never drive recklessly, would never run from an accident, would never put others in danger. The local community was split. Some saw a college athlete getting special treatment, able to hire expensive lawyers while a family mourned their loved one. Others saw a young black man being rushed to judgment, charges filed before a complete investigation could determine what actually happened. Town hall meetings grew heated. The victim's family, understandably devastated, pushed for accountability. Lacy's family insisted their son was being railroaded. As December turned to January, the case hung in legal limbo. A grand jury hearing was scheduled for April. Lacy's defense team said they had evidence that would exonerate him. Prosecutors felt confident in their case, and in the middle of it all, a young man faced the prospect of losing everything: his freedom, his future, his reputation, over an accident that may or may not have been his fault. If you were in Lacy's position, facing charges you believed were unjust but knowing the legal system might not see it your way, how would you cope with that pressure day after day? April came with spring warmth and the promise of resolution. The grand jury hearing was set for a Thursday. On Tuesday, Kyren Lacy was found dead. The preliminary reports indicated suicide. He was 24 years old. The news hit the LSU community like a second crash. Former coaches released statements expressing shock and heartbreak. Teammates who had been quietly supporting him through the legal process went public with their grief and anger. The mental health crisis among young athletes facing legal troubles suddenly had a name and a face that thousands of people recognized from Saturday afternoons in Tiger Stadium. Lacy's family released a statement through their attorney. The words were raw and devastating. They talked about a young man who had been struggling under the weight of accusations he insisted were false. They described watching him deteriorate mentally as the grand jury date approached, terrified that the truth wouldn't matter, that he would be convicted regardless of what actually happened that December night. They said he felt trapped, that he couldn't see a way forward where his name would ever be cleared. The timing, 2 days before the grand jury hearing, raised immediate questions. Had he lost hope that the legal system would vindicate him? Was there pressure we don't know about? His defense attorney released their own statement, expressing devastation and noting that they had been preparing what they believed was compelling evidence of his innocence, evidence that would now never be formally presented. Social media exploded. The hashtag demanding justice for Kyren trended nationally. Former NFL players, including Ryan Clark, who had played at LSU years before, spoke out. Clark's comments on ESPN's Monday Night Football were particularly pointed. Kyren Lacy was innocent, not allegedly innocent, not possibly innocent, innocent, stated as fact by someone who clearly believed the charges never should have been filed. But there was another side to this conversation too. The victim's family was also grieving, had been grieving since December. Their loved one was gone, killed in a crash that definitely happened, regardless of who caused it. Some of their advocates expressed frustration that Lacy's death was shifting public sympathy away from the person who lost their life in the original incident. They pointed out that guilt or innocence aside, someone died on that December road, and that family deserved more than becoming a footnote in someone else's tragedy. Mental health professionals weighed in on the broader implications. The pressure young athletes face when legal troubles arise. The way social media can amplify shame and fear. The reality that the legal system, even when functioning properly, can take months or years to resolve cases, leaving people in a state of suspended terror. The particular vulnerability of young men who tie their entire identity to their athletic performance and public image. LSU announced counseling resources for current and former players. The athletic department faced questions about whether they had done enough to support Lacy during his legal troubles. Some critics noted that once players graduate, universities often cut ties quickly, leaving them without the support systems they'd relied on for years. Could better mental health resources have changed the outcome? Would earlier access to the evidence his attorney claims exonerated him have made a difference? These questions hung heavy as April turned to May. In the weeks following Lacy's death, his attorney made a decision. Rather than let the case die with their client, they would fight to clear his name posthumously. The evidence they had been preparing for the grand jury would be made public, shared with media outlets and posted online for anyone to examine. The centerpiece of their argument was technical analysis of the crash reconstruction. They hired independent accident experts who reviewed the same physical evidence state police had examined. These experts came to a dramatically different conclusion. According to their analysis, Lacy's vehicle was 200 feet behind the point of initial impact when the crash occurred. The tire marks, the debris pattern, the angles of collision, all of it pointed to Lacy arriving at the scene after the fatal impact had already happened. If this analysis is correct, the implications are staggering. It would mean Lacy was charged with causing a death he had nothing to do with, that he spent months under the crushing weight of negligent homicide charges for an accident he witnessed but didn't cause, that he took his own life while facing prison time for something he literally did not do. But there's still the felony hit-and-run charge to consider. Even if he didn't cause the crash, did he leave the scene? The defense attorney addressed this head-on. They claim Lacy did stop, did check on people, but left when he realized multiple other vehicles had stopped and emergency services were being called. They argue this doesn't meet the legal standard for hit-and-run, especially if he wasn't involved in causing the collision. Prosecutors had apparently disagreed strongly enough to file felony charges. The attorney also revealed text messages from the days after the crash. Lacy reaching out to friends, expressing confusion about why police were focusing on him. Messages to his parents saying he didn't understand what was happening, that he had been on that road but hadn't caused the accident. Desperate texts as the charges came down, insisting he was innocent, asking how to prove something he didn't do. Legal experts not connected to the case have reviewed the competing analyses with mixed reactions. Some say the defense's reconstruction is compelling and raises serious questions about the original investigation. Others point out that crash reconstruction is notoriously subjective, that two experts can look at the same evidence and reach opposite conclusions, and that's exactly why these cases go to juries. The grand jury process, they note, would have allowed both sides to present their evidence and let neutral citizens decide if there was probable cause for charges. But that process never happened. And now we're left with dueling versions of reality. One from state police insisting their evidence proves Lacy's guilt, another from defense experts insisting their evidence proves his innocence, and no neutral fact finder to weigh them against each other. The attorney made one more point that resonated widely. They questioned why charges were filed so quickly, before all analysis was complete. In a case with conflicting evidence, they suggested that Lacy's profile as a college athlete might have actually worked against him, creating pressure on prosecutors to act decisively, rather than waiting for clarity. The optics of seeming to give special treatment to an athlete, they argued, might have pushed the system toward rush to judgment in the opposite direction. If you were the prosecutor reviewing this case in December 2024, with public pressure mounting and conflicting evidence, would you have filed charges or waited for more investigation? When Ryan Clark said Kyren Lacy was innocent on national television, he wasn't hedging. He wasn't saying allegedly, or might have been. He stated it as fact, with the conviction of someone who believed a fundamental injustice had occurred. His words opened the floodgates for other athletes to speak out. Former LSU players who had suited up alongside Lacy shared memories. The wide receiver who stayed late after practice to run extra routes. The teammate who tutored younger players. The friend who was first to celebrate others' successes. They painted a picture of someone whose character didn't match the reckless driver described in the charging documents. Several noted that in 4 years at LSU, Lacy had never been in trouble, never had issues with coaches, never showed the kind of judgment that would lead to reckless driving. But the reaction wasn't universally supportive. Some athletes and commentators pushed back, arguing that being a good teammate doesn't mean you can't make a fatal mistake behind the wheel. They pointed out that good people can drive recklessly, that character references don't change physical evidence, that speaking out before seeing all the facts does a disservice to the victim's family. The divide in the sports world mirrored the divide in the broader public. Some saw Lacy as a victim of overzealous prosecution, a young black man rushed to judgment by a system all too ready to criminalize athletes. Others saw him as someone whose celebrity status was being used to minimize serious charges, to shift attention from the person who died in that December crash. College football forums and message boards became war zones. LSU fans largely defended their former player. Rival fan bases accused them of homerism, of defending him only because he wore purple and gold. Moderators worked overtime to delete the most inflammatory comments, the ones that crossed from debate into doxing and harassment. The National Football League Players Association released a statement about mental health resources for players facing legal troubles. They didn't mention Lacy by name, but the timing was obvious. They highlighted the importance of support systems, counseling, and ensuring players don't feel isolated when facing charges. Some saw it as too little too late. Others applauded them for using Lacy's death to potentially help others in similar situations. ESPN dedicated a segment of Outside the Lines to the case, examining the broader question of how the legal system treats athletes. They interviewed prosecutors, defense attorneys, and sports psychologists. The consensus was uncomfortable. Athletes often face harsher scrutiny and faster charges because of public pressure, but they also sometimes receive preferential treatment depending on the jurisdiction and their value to local teams. Lacy, it seemed, might have been caught in the worst of both worlds. Social media influencers with large followings weighed in, often without full knowledge of the case. Viral tweets simplified complex legal questions into hot takes. TikTok videos broke down what really happened based on partial information and speculation. The algorithm rewarded strong opinions over nuanced analysis, so that's what spread. Some athletes used their platforms more carefully. They talked about presumption of innocence, about the importance of letting investigations complete before reaching conclusions, about the tragedy of both the December crash and Lacy's April death. These measured takes got less engagement than the inflammatory ones, but they arguably added more value to the conversation. Youth sports organizations started having conversations about preparing young athletes for life after sports, including what to do if you're ever involved in a serious accident, driver safety programs, understanding legal rights, mental health awareness. Lacy's death, tragic as it was sparking preventive conversations that might help others avoid similar fates. Do you think athletes face different standards in the legal system than regular citizens? And if so, is that fair to anyone involved? Months after Lacy's death, with his attorney making headlines with claims of innocence, Louisiana State Police made their move. They released the video evidence, the full crash reconstruction analysis, and a detailed statement defending their investigation and the charges they had supported. The statement was extensive and technical. It walked through their methodology step by step, how they collected physical evidence from the scene, how they interviewed witnesses, how they analyzed surveillance footage from multiple sources, how they used accident reconstruction software to create a timeline of events, and how all of that evidence, in their professional judgment, pointed to Lacy's vehicle as the catalyst for the fatal crash. They addressed the defense's competing analysis directly. Without naming the experts his attorney had hired, they noted that alternative interpretations have been proposed by parties with a vested interest in a particular outcome. They stood by their own experts' credentials and conclusions. They emphasized that their investigation followed standard protocols. that charges weren't filed hastily, but only after thorough review. The video release was strategic. State police knew they were being accused of rushing to judgment, of getting it wrong, of effectively causing Lacy's death by filing inappropriate charges. By making their evidence public, they were essentially saying, "Judge for yourselves. Here's what we saw. Here's why we reached the conclusions we did." But the move was immediately controversial. Critics argued that releasing evidence after the defendant's death is fundamentally unfair. Lacy can't respond to it. His attorney can. But it's not the same as the defendant being able to take the stand, to explain in his own words what happened. The court of public opinion doesn't have the same rules as a real courtroom. There's no judge to exclude prejudicial evidence, no jury instructions about reasonable doubt, no presumption of innocence. Lacy's attorney called the release a posthumous prosecution and accused state police of trying to rehabilitate their reputation at the expense of a dead man who can't defend himself. They reiterated their position that the state's reconstruction is flawed, that their own experts' analysis is more sound, and that Lacy died unjustly accused. The victim's family, who had been relatively quiet in recent months, released their own statement. They expressed frustration with how the case had become about Lacy rather than their loved one. They said they just wanted the truth, whatever it was. They thanked state police for their investigation and said they trusted the process, even if it would never bring their family member back. Legal analysts debated the ethics of the evidence release on cable news. Some argued that transparency is always good, that the public has a right to see what law enforcement based their decisions on. Others countered that releasing evidence after the defendant's death serves no legitimate purpose since there will be no trial, and only serves to influence public opinion when one side can no longer participate in the debate. The video itself, when people actually watched it rather than just reading about it, was less conclusive than either side suggested. It showed a confusing, chaotic scene. Multiple vehicles moving at highway speeds, brake lights flashing. The moment of impact itself was partially obscured. You could squint and see what state police were pointing to. You could also squint and see what the defense was arguing. Like many pieces of evidence in complicated cases, it wasn't the smoking gun either side wanted it to be. Traffic safety experts used the case to highlight a broader issue. Crash reconstruction is part science, part interpretation. The math is objective, but applying it to real-world scenarios with incomplete data requires judgment calls. Two qualified experts can disagree. That's why these cases go to trial, where both sides can present their evidence and a jury of regular people can decide what they believe. But there will be no trial, no jury, just competing press releases, dueling expert analyses, and a dead young man whose name will forever be associated with this crash, whether he caused it or not. Do you think state police were right to release this evidence publicly? Or does it feel like trying to win an argument against someone who can't respond? The legal case against Kyren Lacy effectively died with him. Prosecutors can't try a deceased defendant. The charges will be formally dismissed, a procedural footnote to a tragedy that consumed multiple families and divided a community. But the questions don't die as easily. Did Louisiana State Police get it right? Is their reconstruction accurate? Their evidence solid? Their conclusions justified? Or did they rush to judgment, file charges prematurely, and create a situation where an innocent young man felt his only option was to end his life? We may never have a definitive answer, because we'll never have the process that's designed to find those answers. A trial with both sides presenting evidence, cross-examining witnesses, and letting neutral fact-finders decide. Lacy's family has made clear they intend to keep fighting to clear his name. They've talked about civil litigation, about wrongful death claims if they can prove the charges were filed without proper basis. Their attorney continues to release information to share expert analyses, to make the case in the court of public opinion since they'll never get to make it in a real courtroom. Whether they'll succeed in changing the narrative around Lacy's involvement remains to be seen. The victim's family has their own form of incomplete justice. Someone died in that December crash. Whether Lacy caused it or not, that death happened, and that family has to live with the loss forever. They'll never get their loved one back. The legal system was supposed to provide accountability, and now that process is permanently derailed. They're left with competing claims about what happened, and no definitive resolution. LSU has implemented new support programs for former athletes facing legal issues. Too late for Lacy, but potentially helpful for others who find themselves in similar situations. The athletic department now maintains contact with graduates for several years after they leave, offering counseling resources and legal guidance. They're training coaches to recognize signs of mental health crisis, and creating pathways for athletes to get help confidentially. The broader conversation about athlete mental health continues. Sports psychologists note that athletes often tie their entire self-worth to their performance and public image. When that image is threatened by criminal charges, the psychological impact can be devastating. Add in the very real possibility of prison time and the isolation that comes with being at the center of a controversy, and you have a recipe for crisis. Law enforcement agencies have also taken notice. Some are reviewing their protocols for high-profile cases, asking whether public pressure leads to rushed charging decisions, whether there are ways to be more deliberate without seeming to give special treatment. It's a difficult balance, and Lacy's case illustrates the stakes when that balance isn't achieved. What this case ultimately represents is the messiness of real justice, not the clean narratives we see in television shows where truth emerges clearly in 42 minutes. Real justice is complicated. Evidence conflicts, experts disagree. Good people make terrible mistakes and innocent people get accused of things they didn't do. Sometimes cases resolve and we get closure. Sometimes, like here, they end without resolution, and we're left with questions that will never have satisfactory answers. Kyren Lacy was 24 years old. He had a college degree, a football career behind him, and what should have been decades of life ahead of him. The person who died in the December crash also had a life, a family, a future that was cut short. Both of those tragedies are real. Both of those losses matter. And somehow, the system that was supposed to sort out what happened between them failed everyone involved. In the end, we're left with a young man gone too soon, a family mourning what they insist was a wrongful accusation, another family mourning a loss that happened regardless of who caused it, and a community searching for truth in a case where definitive truth may be impossible to find. Sometimes that's how these stories end, not with answers but with absences, not with justice but with questions about what justice would even look like when everyone involved has already lost so much.